Welcome to Manga's Seal YouTube channel. The previous video link is on the description box or on the top right card. Volume 15, The Half-Elf Godkin. It could be said that there were no choke points in the great forest of Ivasha, where the elves reside. There were certainly places with dangerous monsters, small nations of demihumans, and impossible labyrinths, but there were no structures that could be called a fortress or impassable physical barriers. However, there existed a place that could be called a choke point. It was the work of a single person. The Holocaust Scripture's vice captain, Shone, tried looking ahead of him, while he hid behind the scattered trees. There sat a girl of around 8 years old, who looked even younger than her age, would suggest, as elves tended to. She was sitting on a small chair on top of a slight incline, holding about too large for her. There was a quiver beside the chair with a few arrows poking out of it. There were fewer arrows in that small quiver and could be counted with both hands, but they were informed beforehand that the arrows would never run out. There was no doubt that it was a magic item. No one was around except for the girl. That was what scared him. A hero could overturn the tides of battle by themselves. You could say that one of them was equal to an army of 10,000. In fact, this girl in front of him had already taken over 1,000 lives from the Theocracy's army. An army of 40,000 was being nailed down by a single girl sitting primly on a chair. The recommended strategy in such situations was to move around the obstacle. It wasn't like they had to break through from here. The Great Forest itself was a natural barrier, but it was not impossible to take a detour. That said, the opponent was not an army, but a single combatant. It was easy to take note of an enemy's movements if they were in large numbers, but this girl was more than just an exceptional combatant. As an individual, she would also be more mobile than their army. Once they lost sight of her, it would be hard to find her again. If an enemy capable of fighting an army alone was left to their own devices in the dark depths of the Great Forest, there was no need to say that the vanguard's morale would take a plunge. They could also try and delay her by pinning her down with a small force, while letting the larger force advance. That was not exactly a bad idea, except for the fact that it was idiotic to divide their forces in a hostile land. So, it could be said that this was their best chance. While the opponent was deployed, although it's doubtful if sitting on a chair could be considered as deployment like this. The top brass decided that she should be dealt with while they knew of her location, even if they had to sacrifice some of their forces. Only a hero could stand against a hero, goes the aphorism. Nothing would be solved by sending in the riffraff. There were no heroes within the Theocracy's invasion army this time, so it fell to the Holocaust Scripture to deal with this. But there were no heroes in the Holocaust Scripture either. There used to be one, but he was transferred to the Black Scripture. In the Theocracy, anybody who stepped into the realm of heroes would be moved to the Black Scripture. Unfortunately, Shone is yet to step into that realm. Despite that, they were sent to this battlefield because it was widely believed that the Holocaust Scripture could take down a hero when they worked as a team. And that's true. The Holocaust Scripture can kill heroes. But there was a large difference between those who just stepped into the realm of heroes and those who were nearly outliers. Even if they could win against the former, it was impossible for them to triumph against the latter. That was why Shone was observing the girls seriously. Common soldiers, stronger soldiers, elite soldiers, heroes, and outliers. Shone, who had seen beings of various levels, had enough knowledge and intelligence to measure her strength accurately and minimize their casualties as much as possible. Although not comparable to the Black Scripture, the members selected for the Holocaust Scripture were elites in their own right, but you could say the same for any of the 6 scriptures. He didn't want them to be killed for no reason. Depending on her strength, he might have to give the order to sacrifice some soldiers to hold her back, while they waited for the Black Scripture to get dispatched from the Theocracy. Shone slowly let out a slow, long breath. Though he was hiding behind the trees with invisibility and silence. Silence was not originally an arcane spell, but this version was developed for use by magic casters. He still had to be mindful even when taking a breath. He wanted to wipe the sweat off his forehead, but considering any of his movements could lead to certain death, he chose not to. Shone might be a talented caster, but he was only a little better than the ordinary person at stealth, without using magic. The elf girl was probably a ranger or an archer. If it was the former, it was possible for her to sense Shone, even though he was being hidden by magic. She might not know his exact location, but she could just use an area of effect, attack, which she was confirmed to be able to do, to smoke him out. Shone wouldn't die from a single attack even if the opponent was a hero, but he was not confident in escaping smoothly if he was wounded. Even more than his fear of death, Shone was afraid that he might die in vain, without bringing back the intel he collected. But she really was an unpleasant brat. She hadn't made a single move since he started observing her. Her glaze, expression makes her look like a doll. But Sho knew she was a living being, not a doll. After an unknown amount of time since he started his observation, the target finally moved. Shon's heart flinched, worrying if the target found him at last. However, the target did not look at him, but that didn't mean he could let down his guard. For people who honed their skills to their limits, it was child's play to feign with their eyes. In fact, Sho knew that such a skill actually existed. With his hearing strengthened by elephant ear, he soon heard a large group of people approaching from behind. They were likely the ones his target noticed. He was sure that they were his peers, soldiers of the theocracy. Shon suddenly felt guilty because he knew the reason why they were sent here. He would not warn them because that's what his duty demanded. Still, he would not leave anything unobserved. That was all he could do. The target's true strength could only be understood if they saw her fight. Those soldiers were the sacrifices the top brass sent for that purpose. They were going to sacrifice the valuable lives of their comrades. Shon turned to look behind him, making sure he would not get noticed by the target. His eyes, strengthened by the second-tier magic Hawkeye, spotted an arrow flying over. The lone arrow bent around the trees in his path and then it scattered into multiple arrows mid-air, turning into a rain of arrows that covered a large area. The arrow was not probably aimed at anything specific. Even if she could locate her target through sound, this was in the middle of the forest. It was impossible to snipe accurately with all the trees around. But something like a fireball would be able to burn beyond these obstructions. She was just emulating it by combining the ability to weave through the gaps between the trees with the ability to multiply the arrows. Shon's strengthened ears picked up cries of pain from the soldiers. It seemed like no one was left unscathed. Cries. They're still alive. The soldiers milled about in confusion, fearing the arrows that came from beyond their vision. As no one managed to figure out the trajectory the arrows flew in, everyone started to run hither-thither. There was no fighting spirit left in them. They weren't exactly doing the wrong thing. In fact, it could be said they were responding correctly by scattering around randomly, which would let at least a few of them survive. The girl fired another arrow. It weaved through the spaces between trees again and then multiplied. Among the rain of arrows, the sounds of pitiful cries and trampled undergrowth gradually came to a halt. He learned one important thing as a result of the deaths of these soldiers. She couldn't kill an ordinary soldier in a single attack. Of course, considering the ability, martial art, that made the arrows multiply, it stood to reason that each arrow would have reduced precision and damage. That said, a hero could kill every one of those regular soldiers with a single attack. It could mean only one thing. She isn't a hero. That brat didn't step into the realm of heroes. That was Shon's conclusion. It was because he worked hard to match his rival, the third seed of the black, scripture, earth, wind and fire, feet, water, that he could be sure of his conclusion. She was weaker than Shon, but that didn't mean they could be at ease. The fighting styles of a magic caster and an archer are strong in their own ways. Even if he was stronger than her in general, the battle could still go either way. It was also possible that she was hiding her true strength after realizing she was under observation. But Shon, the observer in question, could say with certainty that she didn't notice yet. There was only one thing left for them to do. Remove the obstacle in the path of the theocracy's advance. He activated silent magic wall of protection from arrows. He didn't feel like that was enough preparation, but she might notice something suspicious and escape. If he tried to do more at this distance, he can only strengthen his resolve. Silent maximize magic arrow. He came out of hiding from behind the tree and activated his abilities at the same time. He also activated the once per day trump card of the Arcane Devotee class that Holocaust scripture required its members to acquire. He used it to access the spell-strengthening metamagics he had yet to learn. Naturally, he chose triplet magic. A total of 12 magic arrows flew out at the same time. One could not escape from these arrows, but unfortunately, the damage of a single arrow was not enough. As long as there's not much difference between the strengths of the opponent and the caster, it would be hard to kill them even with maximized magic. But that was only true if he was fighting alone. All of his subordinates were observing Shon's movements with invisibility. Their target's expression changed in an instant. Perhaps it was because she was in pain from Shon's attack, or perhaps it was because she saw the 100+ magic arrows coming at her from behind. Shon. Holocaust scripture was entrusted with assassination and counterterrorism, work that required them to be flexible, so their teams consisted of at least 4 members, each with different jobs. This was similar to the adventurers' tactics in the kingdom and the empire. As the adventurers' guilds were in fact created, secretly by the theocracy, you could even call them brothers in arms. The tactic, this time relied upon a team consisting of one common class. On top of that, only those who could use a specific skill were selected. The end result was a team of magic casters who could also use invisibility. hit, hit, hit. It was like wings of light flew across the sky. The target collapsed on the ground and laid still with her face down. Even so, only Shone approached her. He didn't think the target, who was an archer, could use it, but there were illusions that could make one appear dead. He can't let his guard down yet. He put his foot under her body and flipped her around. There was not a single part of the child's body that was without wounds from being hit by their magic arrows. Shone took a closer look at her face. There was no light in the eyes that peeked out from under her swollen eyelids. She was dead for sure. Huh. Right back at you, you shitty brat. They didn't select magic arrow, just so that it could be an act of symbolic revenge. People like rangers with keen senses could sometimes sense and escape from damage if they were attacked with area of effect spells. Mental attacks were situationally effective at dealing fatal damage in a single blow, but there was a high probability that it would just get nullified. So, since he had others to back him up, he chose to use a method that was guaranteed to hit the opponent. Be that as it may, it was still the best spell they could have used to take revenge for the soldiers killed by her arrows. Shone wrinkled his brows at the dead child's face. He felt like there was a hint of tranquility in it. Maybe he was just mistaken, but if he wasn't, that would be extremely irritating. This elf killed nearly 1,000 of his comrades from Theocracy, so he wanted her to die in painful agony, regretting her actions at the end. Shone stopped himself before he could spit on her corpse. He had to get equipment off of her first. He planned to do it here as there were no enemies around. He would probably feel disgusted if he had to touch his own saliva in the process, so he should spit after he took them off her. First, the bow. It was the weapon of an opponent who managed to stop the Theocracy's army by herself. It should be something good. Good grief. Shone suddenly went stiff upon hearing the nonchalant voice of a man.